Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Gurrs, and Purrs. There goes my cat Tariel. I think she's gonna take off. Alright, so today I'm gonna just be reviewing some of the books that I read in October. Towards the end of September, or the beginning of October, Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples released volume 10 of Saga. So I am all over the place because I read volume 6 for this month, but then I jumped to volume 10 and now my brain is all scrambled. So I'm going to talk about volume 6 and volume 10. So if you haven't read those, don't watch this because I don't want to spoil anything. So at this point in Saga volume 6, which I always love, I almost feel like I don't have to say that anymore. Anytime you watch a review of Saga, it's just going to be me saying how much I love Saga. So at this point in the story, Hazel is with her grandmother, Clara, and they are at a planet that houses refugees, I believe. And this is where Hazel is being educated at the moment. So while she's there, she has this really lovely teacher. I'll try to find a photo of the teacher, because she's kind of like she's at the beginning, but she still kind of is a pivotal character to the trajectory of the story. There you go. That's her teacher. Okay. So during the beginning, Hazel and her grandmother have been separated from Hazel's parents. So while they're settled there, at some point the teacher tries to help Hazel and the grandmother escape, and in the meantime, simultaneously, Hazel's parents are also trying to get to them. All the while that storyline's going on, the Will, who is the hired assassin, goes and hunts down the two journalists. I can't think of their name right now. The two journalists who were sworn to not report on any stories regarding Hazel and her family, because by this point in the story, Will's sister, who is also an assassin, is murdered. So the spell that or curse. Oh, I'm sorry about that. That's really noisy. Is no longer effective on them. And so the Will is in like not a good place. He's not mentally stable at this point because he's mourning the death of his sister. And so he manipulates, entraps, causes harm to the journalists in order to get what he wants, basically. Something that I really enjoyed about every single volume of comics of Saga from the very beginning is that Marco and Alana, Hazel's parents, have made a decision to have her not in practicality but as an idea, and that stems largely from how they felt inside internally about the war, and what really pushed them over the edge to make the decision that they made is that they read an author's books. It's like basically these trash novels, trash romance novels, but that's like as a disguise to have really deep philosophical conversations about pacifism and war. And so as we go on, Alana and Marco will get other people engaged in the same literature. And in this particular volume, that's something that Marco's mother, Clara, also does. She just involves people in this literature and galvanizes people to engage with a different type of thinking other than being pro-war or, you know, fixating on what side they're for in the war. And something that the character of the teacher of Hazel says is like one of my favorite quotes. And she writes, "But anyone who thinks one book has all the answers, hasn't read enough books. That's like my favorite of all the volumes. It's very simple, but also powerful. And Hazel thinks the same thing, because then she says, of the many things my first teacher taught me, that's the one that stuck. So I feel like that's having this whole other conversation about how just because you find material that, you know, you engage with, that doesn't mean that that's the only type of material to have a conversation with. You know, there's always more to learn. There's always more to read about. And I just really enjoyed that. So I don't want to say too much more than that. But once again, I just love the character building. Oh, also there's a character named Petrov at this point. And that's another character I really love. But I think I'll talk about that character later as the volumes go on. So that was the first one. I don't know where to put this. I have too much stuff everywhere. The next one is volume 10 of Saga, which I jumped to. So again, if you haven't read volume 10, or if you haven't read 1 through 9, skip this. You don't want to see this. I'm just going to spoil everything for you. So now Hazel is with her mom, Alana, on this journey. She's older. I want to say she's a teenager. I just read it and I already forgot. She's a teenager, very young, and she's on the run with her mother. But by now her father has died. Also, Prince Robot's son is with them, and now Alana is raising him as their own. And in fact, as part of the cover up to survive, she's now saying that they're both not her children. She's just raising them as her kids. That's what her cover is to tell everyone else. And that's kind of easy to believe in a place where there's constant war and children left to their own devices, I guess. And what I really love, which I can't share, but the first time you see Alana in a slide, she like rips open her shirt and she's showing her breast, and she's just trying to sell breast milk powder, which had me cracking up because I felt like it was a callback to volume 1, which is the cover of it is Alana and Marco together when Hazel's a baby and she's breastfeeding Hazel. And you know, some people were in uproar because how dare a woman actually use her breast for what they're supposed to be for, to breastfeed her child, you know, which is so funny. But I just thought, I mean, I'm assuming that's a little bit of a callback to that. But we kind of see that right now it's the characters in different ways dealing with their parents' death, right? For Hazel, she's not really processing in a way, or maybe she's still in that stage of denial of accepting her father's death, as where you see her robot brother is not talking. He is just having a really difficult time processing the death of his father. And it's coming out in that way where Robot is now nonverbal, just really just trying to process things. And so from the front of the cover, you see that there's another male figure in Hazel's life, and apparently from her narration, this is one of the many male figures that will come into her life and maybe try to be, in some way, even unbeknownst to them, a father figure in a way to her. So Alana is peddling breast milk powder, but what she's actually doing beyond that is she's actually a drug dealer, or like a drug smuggler. And that's how they're able to survive. And they try to create a more legitimate life for themselves. That is ultimately the challenge in this volume, is trying to legitimize themselves in this world to sell regular goods instead of drugs instead. So that's what this volume is about. Once again, I really love it. I love how people are dealing with grief in their own way and just how that manifests itself. So yeah, another great read. By the end of this volume, I was just in tears at the very end. I don't want to say why, rather just give you the time to read it yourself. All right, everyone, I had to reset for a second because my cats were acting bananas. All right, so the next book I read is Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This book takes place in Mexico City, and there are two main characters, which are Domingo and Adel. So Domingo has lived his whole life in Mexico City, and Adel is a vampire. So not only does the author reimagine vampire lore, but they also reimagine Mexico City. Mexico City is a place that does not allow vampires into the area, and this is really fueled by the gangs in Mexico City themselves, rather than being policed by officials, government officials. And so Adel and Domingo are very much like an odd couple. They meet on a subway, and Adel commissions Domingo to be her Renfeld, I believe she calls, which to me is similar to being called a familiar, right? Vampires typically have a familiar that do their bidding. And Domingo agrees. They're very much an odd couple because Domingo is this optimistic figure. He's not naive. And I think that could be misconstrued. His optimism could be seen that way, but he's very smart and crafty and optimistic, as where Adel is not optimistic. She's like the complete opposite in a way. And ultimately she snuck herself into Mexico City and she needs to get out. This narrative also includes the drug cartel, so vampires are mixed in this as well. I love the story, and what really drew me in the most as I went around, and what really drew me in the most is not necessarily any particular underpinning of philosophical conversations or anything like that. Like, all my markers here are typically, you know, like little gems of dialogue I enjoy. This time around, it wasn't that. I was just so entertained by all the different elements that the author included to construct her own vampire lore. So she uses like the classic vampire tropes, and she gets those and decides, you know, which ones are going to be part of myth, which ones are going to be actually a part of the vampire lore, and she kind of builds it from there. And I think she even makes how do I say this, the vampire genre richer. The vampires, typically when you read a book, you learn about who vampires are, and there's like a set standard, and it's universally accepted within the world that you're reading about, right? Whether it's Interview with a Vampire or what is it called? The Witching Hour? The Witch, I already forget. But in her story, what she does is she creates, for lack of a better word, like a biodiversity within vampires. And it's constructed by, I don't want to delve too deep into it, because I feel like so much of it is so entertaining and so thoughtful. I don't want to ruin the read. But for example, Idle's vampires are called one particular name, and then there'll be like vampires from a region of Europe that are called necros, and how she devises the parameters of what makes them immortal, what makes them not immortal, like what kills them, what powers they have, what are their weaknesses. And that's not just defined by supernatural elements. I feel like she takes real world historical facts and includes it and enriches the story and the elements of each faction of vampires. It's really interesting. I don't know how else to say it, but I'm sure there's a better way. So yeah, biodiversity is the best way I could possibly think of. I'm looking at my notes because I don't want to forget anything. Another element of this book that I really enjoyed is the action in it. There's more, I guess you could say, action elements towards maybe the last third of the book, or that's just the last half of the book. But I'm not a big fan of action in books because sometimes it takes me out, or I don't think it's just done very well. But I really enjoyed the adventure element of the book. I really was sucked in and I really enjoyed it. There is an element of a romance also in the book, but it really takes a back seat to the story, and I really like that. I don't have a problem with romance, but when it's kind of created into, or when it's baked into the story, I just don't want it to overwhelm it, and I don't want that to be like a defining factor of the outcome of the book, you know? And it really wasn't. So it was just another element that I enjoyed, but again, it didn't overwhelm the storyline or take anything over. There are plenty of other characters that are just as entertaining, but I don't want to get too much into it because I don't really want to spoil it for you. But I mean, it's really just an incredibly entertaining read, I'll say that. And it's just not service level. I mean, again, I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but I really enjoyed the elements that the author included, such as like historical facts, and kind of baked it into the story. And I'll just read you like one paragraph that I enjoyed, and then that's it. I won't say anything else. So Domingo is narrating this section, and he says, "She was standing in front of a stand selling t-shirts with the image of the Virgin on them, and the irony wasn't lost on him that this was a vampire, right by the basilica, right by a bunch of rosaries and crucifixes and cheap plastic saints. She looked sad, and he had no idea if it was because of the talk of her people, or maybe because vampires don't deal well with Catholicism, but he wanted to make it right." So that will be the quote that I'm going to use for this book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think you should pick it up, especially for the month of October. Actually, when am I posting this? I'm posting this at the end. So yeah, pick it up. It's a really good read, and I just really enjoyed it. So the next book I'm talking about very briefly, because I'm still reading it, and that's Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. I've read a couple of other books by this author. I've read Dawn, but that was years ago. That must have been back in like 2014. And I've also read Kindred, probably in 2013, around the same time, which is also being adapted and should be released in the next couple of months into a show. I don't know what network. I think it might be on Hulu, something like that. So this is a vampire tale. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm still in the middle of reading it, but This is another book where I'm really enjoying how the author builds how she defines vampires. I love that. I love when authors kind of look at what's been built before and decides to like expand on it in their own way. It's just really cool. So that's where I'm at right now. Hey everyone. All right. So it's almost the end of October and I've read 2 more books, but before I discuss them, I think I forgot to mention something about certain dark things, and I just wanted to add on to that conversation. One of the things, or one of the aspects of this book that I really, really love is that there is a romance included in the story, but it's not taking up the entire narrative, and it's almost not inconsequential, but I just like that it takes a back seat in a way to the story. I'm not a fan when a romance becomes like a plot device or almost a loophole to lazily cover up something else or make a problem into a solution with a romance, if that makes sense. And so that's another compliment I wanted to give Certain Dark Things that I really enjoyed. It's such a great book. And on top of that, the other character, I'm already forgetting, Domingo. I don't know how to say this, but I really admired his lens of how he sees the vampire character. It was at times endearing, and I don't think I've really read a book, romance or not, that really made me enjoy like the male lens in that way, as we speak about the male lens or the female lens in movies or in books. But his was such a beautiful point of view, and maybe that has to do with the fact that the writer of this book is a female, but I just thought that was worth noting. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about 2 books that I've tried my best to blast through. Okay, Fledgling by Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler, I believe all her work that she's written has been science fiction or speculative fiction, I believe. I've read Kindred. What else? I've read a couple of books by this author. There's not a list in this book. I've read Kindred, Dawn, which is, there's also an entire series packaged together called Lilith's Brood that has all 3 books. That's also something I'm going to be reading next year. What else have I read? I've read Parable of the Sower, but I don't even remember it that much. So at some point I'm going to have to read it again. So yeah, next year is definitely going to be an Octavia E. Butler year because I have plenty to read. All right, so this story is about Shori. I'm sorry, I've been so busy. I'm trying to keep everything straight. Shori is a vampire. This book is not your traditional vampire story. When I say traditional, I mean usually vampires are very much interlocked with horror, and I somehow don't really think this is horror, right? It's so if you're picking up a vampire book and you think that this is going to be in the vein of, let's say, Bram Stoker's Dracula or any other vampire tale that's interlocked with horror, that's the only way I can think to put it. That's not what this is. And so if you do that, you're going to be disappointed if you have that like mindset, I guess. I love this book. And that's because Octavia Butler does what she does so wonderfully, is that she will use, let's say, the vampire genre to talk about other topics like racism or the patriarchy, monogamous, and then what do you want to say, polygamous relationships. And I want to say, I could be wrong, but if anybody interprets it differently, please tell me. I felt there was almost like this other conversation about eugenics in a way. That's just what stuck out to me. Anyway, so Shori is a vampire. She wakes up and she has no clue what's happened. But she knows, I think something bad has happened. I think there's other people have died. She just has no recollection. So even though she's a vampire, she has to discover that she's a vampire because she has no clue. One of the first people she bumps into helps her out, and they become like immediately like romantically engaged with her, or fascinated by her. This is where there is the storyline, and I don't know if it's problematic or not, or because she's a vampire, maybe she's entrancing the person and not realizing it. But this person that picks her up as an adult, and although her is a vampire, even though that she's old in her years, her body is like a teenager. So it's a little bit questionable, their relationship early on, and throughout the book. But I also wasn't really sure what the author was trying to say with that in particular, specifically that relationship, you know. Anyways, so yeah, she's definitely on a discovery to find out who she is and what's happened. And along the way, I really enjoyed how she has relationships with male and female, and there's like no questioning about it. She's just who she is. Something else that the author included that is incredibly creative is that, how do I talk about this? This is hard to talk about without going into spoilers. So the way that vampires are engineered, it's almost like vampires are really selective how they create more of themselves. And so what Shori learns is that her vampire parents engineered her with I think a female. I'm saying I think because it's like a little bit, there's so much engineering that's going on. That's her human mother that also happens to be black, but they did it on purpose because they see that there's power in creating Shori this way. She's stronger, she's more powerful. So what Octavia Butler did is she very much made Shori's existence as a vampire like this super being. And this is where a conversation about racism comes into play, because all other vampires are white, and so they don't want her to exist. But it's interesting because you very much understand that they really actually, what's going on is that like they fear her powerfulness in being herself and who she is. And it's just a really beautifully complex conversation about racism and how the vampires hide under the guise of like tradition. And it's just a really incredible conversation. What I would say is that by the end of the book, it felt like not anticlimactic, but I wanted more. And I think that's because Octavia Butler planned on this book being a series, but then she passed away. So I would very much like to see what else she was going to do with this, because apparently there's other drafts of what she was going to do with this story. So when we're reading this, you do get the sense, I think, that there's more to tell and we're not getting it, you know, so we can only rely on the one book. So, I mean, I wouldn't fault her that. She had grand plans for this story. I really enjoyed it. And something that Octavia Butler does, and I don't know if she does this in all her work, but I'll keep an eye out, is that in this book, she mentions Pasadena, and that's kind of, I know she went to Pasadena City College near me, and I believe she also lived in Pasadena as well as other places, but she tends to reference this area in California and I always enjoy reading it just because I did live over there for some time. So there's just like a home connection there. And so yeah, that's totally not important to the story, but I just like it. All right, moving along. The next book that I read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read through this pretty quickly. I really enjoyed it. I know that this is a classic. Everyone knows the story, and there's been so much different like nods to the story or adaptations or even parodies. I don't know if you've ever seen the comedy Young Frankenstein, but that's hilarious. All right, so this is about a scientist that basically in a way becomes a mad scientist and reanimates a body to create a monster, basically. And I really enjoyed this because I felt like what the author's doing is using this reanimated body that now has a fresh eyes onto the world, really talk about what's beautiful about humanity, but also the horrors of humanity. And that's something that only this being in this way could really have like a fresh pair of eyes to say things so bluntly, and how there's so many like hypocrisies or paradoxes within humanity. And I found it really riveting. And also, I felt as if the character of Frankenstein and his creation are really just two sides of the same coin. What they're both after in each other is very much the same. So they're really just like hurting themselves. So I thought it was, in a way, like a psychological thriller. And I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't know why that never really crossed my mind to view this book in a way like a psychological thriller. And I wish I had read it sooner. And yeah, so I can see why it's a classic. I really, really love it. All right, so those are the two books I've read so far. And I have two more books to go. And I don't know if I'm going to get through them. I really want to. So even if I read like a couple of days into November, I just really want to plow through it. So the next book I'm reading is The Dumb House. And I'll just read you the back. Basically, Luke, I'm assuming, is the main character. And as a child, his mother tells him the story of the dumb house, an experiment on newborn babies raised in silence, designed to test the innateness of language. And so this is something that Luke is enthralled by, and it leads him to do disturbing actions, disturbing behaviors, like dissect animals and examine them. And somehow he finds or is looking for a connection to language in that. And that leads him to continue his obsession. And following the death of his mother, his obsession results in him haunting, experimenting on his own children. So this sounds disturbing. Let's see if I could get through it. I opened this up and it just looks like regular size text, which I think I could be okay with. I think I could plow through that quick enough. And the next book I have is Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. And I've wanted to read this for a while. I want to say that Jen Campbell may have mentioned this book on her channel, and I became interested. And I just finally cracked it open, and I see that the text is a little bit larger, so I feel like I can wipe the sweat off my brow because I think I'll be able to get through this pretty quickly. I think the size of it and the pages were kind of like, felt a little bit daunting until I actually looked, and I thought, okay, I could do this. All right, wish me luck. I'm days away from November, and so we'll see how this goes. Hey everyone, October has flown by, and it's the first week of November when I've gotten to the last two books on my list. And so we'll just get to it. So the first book is The Dumb House. This book is by John Burnside. All the books I chose for the month of October are for the horror genre. It was Halloween. The best way to kind of boil down this book, to summarize it, is if you've ever seen the movie Psycho, this felt like an origin story for Norman Bates. So the character Luke, who you read the story through their eyes through the entire book, so you're getting an unreliable narrator. He was told from a very young age by his mother about a story about the dumb house and how there was a person in a powerful position that had children raised in the facility by people that couldn't speak, and to see how that affected their language development. That's the short version of what happened. Luke becomes so intrigued to the point of obsession, and really early on, the character establishes that he is very close to his mother to the point where he thinks that him and his mother are the only real thing in this world. Like he's really not in touch with reality, and later at times he even questions if he's real. So this is someone that's very disconnected, very delusional, and susceptible to grand imagination in a way. So his obsession leads him to very apathetic, and how else will I say it? Because the book did it really well. I mean, the author's prose are really incredible. Early on in the book, he says, "At the time, though, I would have said it was a logical act, another step in the research I had begun almost 4 years before, the single most important experiment that a human being can perform, to find the locus of the soul, the one gift that sets us apart from the animal, to find it first by an act of deprivation, and then later by a logical and necessary destruction." So, this character is a very calculated person, and I feel like he hides behind his, what he considers his intellect. This is someone that's so arrogant that thinks that he's so smart, smarter than others, that he is equal to a scientist, So from a very young age, he starts dissecting animals. And what you learn early on is that this is all rooted in the way that he was raised. And then you kind of see who he becomes from there. But from the top of the story, like the first line is him, I'm not spoiling it, it's on the back of the summary, is him admitting that he's killed his kids. And then the rest of the story is just him tracing back his childhood to present day, who he's become. And again, the prose really suck you into the story. And I feel like this book, oddly enough, it doesn't have an eerie tone. It has more of a deranged tone, if that makes any sense. And because we are reading this book from the Luke's point of view, there's just certain actions that take place that I feel like as I'm reading them, I can't tell if what he's saying is true or if this is just him being delusional. And I thought that was really well crafted. I mean, I have so many markers because I was basically trying to indicate to myself all the red flags in a way that the author was leaving for the readers, like breadcrumbs. And it was just a really incredible read. I wish I could say more about it, but I mean, if you want to read a really great horror novel, this will be great for next October. Or if you're just into the horror genre, because I'm actually not big on horror, but this really had a creep factor that I wasn't expecting. And so I think that you'll enjoy it. I'm trying to think about what other books to compare it to. If you enjoy the book A Clockwork Orange, although that book is so specific, also to all the slang that it's written in. This one isn't written in like a bunch of slang terms, but I felt like there was something that's in the same vein, right? Where you're reading from a terrible person's point of view, if I could say that. So yes, I really enjoyed this. This is really good. I don't know if I ever will read it again. It was so out of pocket for me. It's just so deranged. But if any of you have read this, please let me know what you think about it. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that one. All right, the next book I didn't read. I'm going to read it next October. I just couldn't make it happen. And that's Poor Things by Alice Dare Gray. This is one of those books where I really was thinking to myself, I'm finally going to get to it this month. And I wanted to read it because I just read Frankenstein. And this book is actually meant to be a parody in a way of Frankenstein. And so I wanted to read it right after I read Frankenstein so that I could draw some comparisons and see what the author was trying to say. But anyways, I just didn't have the time. Towards the end of October, I kind of had to drop everything and handle some personal affairs. So I was going to have a weekend, I think the last weekend of October, where I was going to have a bunch of time just to like sit down and crank through these two books. That was the plan, and it just didn't happen. My plans went off the rails. So I also don't want to hold myself, because this is what I do. I don't know if you guys do this, but when I create like a TBR, I will want to stick to it when I have another month coming in and I need to jump on the next thing, and I just don't want to let go of the fact that I haven't finished my TBR. And I'm trying to learn to just like let it go and be like, there's going to be a next time. So yeah, that sums up everything that I read. If I'm going to look at, oh my goodness, everything I read and figure out what I love most for the month of October, I think it's Certain Dark Things. That one really stole my heart. Just the whole construction of how vampires are handled was incredible. I loved it. Then I'd have to say, oh, it's a toss-up. I think it's Frankenstein. Frankenstein was another book that really surprised me, and I didn't realize how much I was actually going to enjoy what this book was saying. And yeah, I mentioned it before, but I didn't realize how much of like a psychological thriller this was in a way. And so really I was blown away for the month of October, which really made up for September, because September was a little bit of a downward spiral. After that, I'd have to say Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. This felt less like a horror, more of a commentary on society and social justice, which is actually what Octavia Butler does so well. So I guess in my mind I wanted more like, maybe I wanted more classic horror this month. I don't know, but again, I love her books. This is definitely a book I'm going to go back and read a couple of more times, because the thing with Octavia's writing is that there's always something else to take from the material that she's created. So there's that. And then, let me see. The Dumb House. The Dumb House is up there. I forgot about The Dumb House. This is, I don't know what to say about a book that's so creepy. Sorry. I don't know what to say about a book that's so creepy, but that I enjoyed. Again, I'm not really that much into the horror genre, but yeah, this was a wild ride. And then, of course, without category, I can't rank these, is Saga. I love Saga so much, and I'm glad that I'm rereading the comics so that I could keep up with the new volumes that are coming out. I think there's going to be another volume 11, coming out in January, I think. And that's kind of where I'm at. But yeah, that's it. October is over and done with. It's already November. I'm gonna race to my next readathon, which is a Skoden readathon, and that's what's kind of making me feel pressure to drop Poor Things, because I really just want to scramble through November and just read a bunch of those books that I have on my shelf by Indigenous authors for the month of November. All right, everyone, I hope you're doing well and staying warm, because this November is pretty chilly out here. All right, everyone, I'll talk to you later.